What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Actuali Podcast. We are joined today by our great friend of the show, Gary Bergel. He hasn't been on since episode 14, 5 years ago, so it's a pleasure to have you back. And of course, I'm Chris.
I'm DJ.
My man, DJ. And let's get on with it. So, welcome back, Gary. It's good to see you, brother.
Good to be back.
Yes, this man's had a great impact on my life. He was my art history professor when I was going to our local community college and just made a great impact on me. So if you guys enjoy this episode, make sure you definitely check out our previous episode, episode 14 podcast. And why don't you give us a quick introduction?
Hard to do, but born in Wisconsin to a farmer. At age 8, moved into a tavern from the dairy farm. One of the first in the village to go off to college in Madison, Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin-Madison. Came to faith when I was teaching at Western Michigan University. Long story there. Degrees in biology, secondary ed, studio arts. And then one morning, as I was normally would have been waking and baking to Anna, Jesus Christ was in my kitchen. Not an open eye vision, but his presence was unmistakable. I was born and baptized into pre-Vatican II Roman Catholicism. So Christ was not unfamiliar to me. I can look back and see I always had a deep love and regard for that one that I didn't really understand because of the doctrine of the time was more the vengeful God waiting for you to fail again. And you go into your guilt spiral and all the rest. But all I heard, not audibly, but in my heart, in my spirit, was follow me. And the sense I had was, this is the King of the universe, not just the Jesus you looked at on the cross in the church when you had to go to Mass before school every morning. This was a living being. And my life changed. And I realized I hadn't lit up anything and found out a bit later that my students at Western Michigan University had me on their top 10 faculty members for God to get hit list, their prayer hit list.
Wow.
And I came to faith. All I can say is I entered living faith. And Christ has been real to me ever since. I can now say there are times I do really know him as a friend, elder brother, and all the rest that he is. We're finally hearing or going through a re-examination of how cosmic this one was, and I'm speaking about deity, then he's part of the pre-existent God we talk about. Okay? Eternal, past, present, future, eternities that we can delve into, present. And my life has never been the same. I think I'll stop with that.
Beautiful. So what were you prior to experience?
Hippie.
A hippie.
Hippiedom.
Okay.
The Vietnam War era.
We saw the movie Jesus Revolution together.
It was happening in Kalamazoo, Michigan, totally parallel to what was happening out coast.
Great movie, guys, worth checking out. So you would identify as one of these
I'm a Jesus freak. What I say now to some people, because I don't feel like I fit in a lot of the church boxes, I'll just say, no, I'm Gary, I'm a leftover.
I like that. Okay.
Because from an addict, I turned into a Jesus follower and was called a Jesus freak on campus. And pastors who were bringing in abortion on demand, and one of the first ways of feminism, circulated a petition to have me fired from the faculty when I came to faith.
Oh, but why do you think?
Well, we didn't even know that Jesus wanted to do miracles today, heal people and stuff. And so we read the Bible and took him at his word, and we'd pray for each other, and we had healings and deliverances, cleaned our acts up, etc. And we're privileged to be granted fathers in the faith, certain pastors who really truly helped us put our life pieces back together. My family pastor is still alive, he's 80. And many have passed, though, in the last few years. Some of the old men of God from Britain, Europe, I was privileged to know for different reasons.
Turn the mic a little bit.
Okay, yeah. And so I still see myself. I've also been an artist since childhood. I just made stuff out of whatever was around. Didn't have an art course till sophomore year in college because the man who taught it was vice principal of the high school, but he died the year I came to high school.
Oh, wow.
But the biology teacher had a black and white darkroom as part of his biology lab and ran a photography club. So he taught me film photography, and I opened a film studio at age 16 and did wedding pictures and baby pictures that hand-colored with transparent oils because color photography didn't exist.
Wow.
I'm that ancient. I turned 81 in just a few days, God willing.
Happy birthday, brother.
Yeah. Amen.
So what has it been like? This is just a quick aside, but what has it been like for you watching the increasing rate of technological change? Because, I mean, you're colorizing photos.
Well,
First started
yeah,
doing
you had,
photography.
yeah.
And now you see what we have.
I think it helps some of us who are older see some of the potential dangers that even we were talking about before, going online here. And pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
You gain discernment with the years, if you want to. If not, what? Spiral to self-destruction? Entertaining yourself to death? One way or the other? So
that's what's been happening, it seems like, to our culture as of late.
I'd say for me personally, because of what I have lived through and how my own life has been transformed by the presence of Christ in a real living faith, I see the Holy Spirit working in unusual ways again, like he did with us back in that Nam era of hippiedom and all. And I find very wonderful pastors, male and female, have a hard time seeing the Holy Spirit at work. They're full of longing. They're full of anguish. They see a decline in most every area. And I try to encourage them because of some of my unusual callings into the arts and out to more the marginal people, recovery circles, etc. So I have hope. I see a lot of positive change in people.
So, I'll agree with that. I know I can be a negative Nancy sometimes, but the one thing that does give me hope is I'm seeing it real time, and not just on the web as well, but also and just when you do your little people watching, when you're sitting in the car at the gas station and you can see people walk by and you can tell how they carry themselves and interact and stuff. I'm seeing that change. I don't know if they go to church or not or anything like that, but there is a marked change with it. And you get and
we're ready to be kind and loving towards each other, especially after being so closed off during COVID. I see a lot of people embracing their fellow humans in kind ways, open, genuine smiles and greetings from perfect strangers. It's cool. I see people either consciously or subconsciously sometimes trying to help heal that division that has been sowed effectively.
Right. We're to be living witnesses, not just words,
but actors of God's love.
Yeah, we're to live the gospel, the way of Jesus of Nazareth. The Sermon on the Mount, basically, the fine print to what some say the Decalogue is the Constitution. The Beatitudes therein that you read in Matthew and all is the fine print
Yes.
that
Yeah,
we
you
should
speak
be
of the way.
walking out.
The way, walking out
Yeah,
the way of Christ, journeying with Christ in his way.
in his
So
way.
taking on that orientation towards life, that posture towards life
Right.
that Jesus embodied, that's something that I think you did a great job of bringing into my awareness, was the focus on his way of being.
Yeah.
And then we covered that extensively during John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series when we covered that series of lectures. And Vervaeke talked about how we've really gotten stuck on this idea of the word faith as just a belief, and believing and saying that you believe in this, as say the one and only Son of God, it makes you a Christian, versus the actual real dedication to following that way of being.
And that person of
and
being.
we kind of let one thing go to the fore and the other one go to the background, but the original Christians were called followers of the way.
Yes.
Right.
People of the way.
People of the way.
Until Antioch, that's the first time the word Christian was used.
And it was used as a derogatory kind of slur, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Those followers of Christ, those Christians.
Yeah.
What a radical guy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you just gave us a good segue into the first
Good.
video clip that we're going to look at here. And this is going to be from an event that was called Seeking God in Wild Places. Up for us now. We're going to see Paul Kingsnorth speak on his coming to Christianity.
So this is a really interesting question because I'm about the same age as Martin. I'm 51 now, so I was born in the early 70s. I grew up I was a child in the 70s and a teenager in the 80s and a young man in the 90s. And certainly when I was young, there was an extremely, well, I was going to say there's an anti-Christian atmosphere in society, but I'm not sure that's quite true. I think there was just a complete lack of interest in religion, certainly around where I was. Religion was just seen as a slightly strange thing that you might do if you were eccentric, or, it's a thing that we were supposed to be moving out of. It was a backward thing to be doing. And the Christian religion particularly was regarded with just embarrassment or contempt. And that's precisely because it's the ancestral religion of this culture. We don't have, as I say, people didn't raise eyes when I became a Buddhist. Funnily enough, they didn't even quite raise eyes when I became a Wiccan and decided I was going to do magic rituals in the woods. But being a Christian, I had a very similar reaction to Martin's. I had readers emailing me and saying, I can't believe this is so disgusting, I will never read you again. All these sorts of things. And there's an incredibly rageful reaction from some people, which is out of all proportion to what's happened. And I think about this a lot because I think, as you said, Claire, the way I put this in my writing more recently is there is a throne at the heart of every culture. You're always worshipping something. There is a God at the heart of your culture, whether you know that or not. And there's a God in your heart, whether you know that or not. And by that I mean there is something higher than you that you look to all the time. So either that's God, it's a real God, and you have a spiritual tradition, or it's something else. Now we, over the last several hundred years in the West, have dethroned God, and we have replaced God with any number of different things. We have moved towards a giant experiment, which as far as I can see is unprecedented in the history of the world, of trying to create a society in which there is no higher realm. There is no God, there are no gods. I can't think of a culture in the past at all anywhere on earth that did not have a sacred center of some kind, however different the cultures may have been. There's always a throne with God on it, or with a representative of the sacred on it, but not here. What we have done is create a purely material society, and we have enthroned reason, or perhaps we've enthroned economic growth, perhaps we've enthroned technology. Ultimately, what all of those things mean is that we've enthroned ourselves. And the Wiccan thing, whatever it is, it's not quite a religion. The Wiccan practice draws a lot from Aleister Crowley, great, terrifying, weird, strange, interesting 20th century occultist. And Aleister Crowley's famous line, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," is adapted for Wiccans. They say, "Do what thou wilt and harm none." But basically it means the same thing. Do what you want. And that's the story of the 20th century, and that's the story of the cultural revolution and the sexual revolution and the whole of the modern age. Do what thou wilt. There's a big difference between do what thou wilt and thy will be done. They're the opposite. Mm-hmm. They're the opposite. And so the Christian faith has been retooled. We have a new story about it that we've been telling certainly for my whole lifetime, which is this church is just an oppressive monstrosity. It's really, the church only exists as an excuse for bishops to have power. The church is about crusades and burning witches and the rest of it. And some of that is true. There's no doubt about it at all. But the truth of it is subsumed into a bigger story, which allows us to say, that's stuff we used to do. And we've gone beyond that now. We're rational, reasonable people, and we can deal with the world on its own terms. And that brought us the 20th century, and the 20th century brought us every horror imaginable from Nagasaki to Auschwitz. So I don't think the rational experiment is working. And we've got to a point now where we are in this, almost this desert. We've torn away the spiritual tradition we used to have. We've said we don't need that anymore, that's ridiculous. And we haven't put anything in its place except, as I say, the self. And I feel that something is happening now where increasing numbers of people, especially young people, who I hear from all the time, are saying this doesn't work. And they're starting to say, what is the truth? Where do we actually go? And more of them are looking into Christianity, just as I did, and finding when they do, if they look into its depth, that it is something that they weren't taught at school. Certainly it's something I wasn't taught at school. The actual depth and wildness and strangeness and beauty and power and transformational capacity that the faith has is not something I was ever told about. It was just a set of moral rules I was supposed to follow because Jesus said so. And something is there that we haven't been made aware of. And I think that we're starting to come back to it and ask the questions again. And you can see this everywhere. There's so much of I think something happened with COVID. COVID was apocalyptic in the literal sense that the word apocalypse means unveiling. And COVID unveiled a lot of things about ourselves and our culture, and all sorts of strange spiritual currents came out of that.
Place to stop there, guys. Thoughts?
It's an excellent summary
I think it is.
of how we've spiraled to this.
We were talking before the episode about Nietzsche's prediction that when he said that we have killed God and will never be finished cleaning up the blood, so to speak. And then, of course, the horrors of the 20th century occurred, and he predicted that in the 19th century. But he saw already, as a result of the scientific revolution, the increased secularization of society, this self-focused way of being starting to come to the fore, and the demystification of our spiritual traditions returning to the background. And as a result, we started to lose our compass, you could say, our way of orienting to the world in concert with one another. You know, these shared stories they seem to be essential for human beings, for human culture to flourish.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's happening in a way that's, not necessarily because, it's popular and it's the in thing to do, it's actually quite unpopular and will get you into trouble in some places. So it's that
authentic Christianity always will. Real following of the real Jesus of Nazareth always will. Even from Christian friends.
I think you're right, yeah, because we're in such a frenzied state right now where you'll notice this extreme partisanship starting to take over. People seem to be ideologically captured to some degree in that we become possessed by our ideas and our preferences. We become so certain that we see those other groups that don't believe precisely the way we believe increasingly as not just others, but enemies. We were starting to dehumanize one another, and in that context, talking about peace and love and goodwill towards even quote unquote enemies or those with whom you disagree is something that, in a frenzied state, people are not trying to hear.
Right.
Yeah.
Materialistic pop Christianity is really where I feel America and a broader church, not all of it, as I've been reintroduced to the historic Black church through some consulting work that I've done the last years. Very, very solid faith people in most of the historic Black churches that I've been inside of or working with the various leaders, help them find their voice this time.
When you see the worship and the spirited expression in the music, you can see why that is.
But they related to a suffering Christ. Their slave ancestors knew suffering more than really what we as whites know as Christianity. I had an experience in the chapel in the slave port of Cotonou, Benin, where the ship was there anchored in the past off the coast. And there was a worship service. And sitting in that chapel on a visit, the Lord spoke to me and sort of challenged me. Gary, do you think I was more upset with voodoo fetish worship than the quality of heart of the Christian slavers that worship me before then they transported the slaves over to
And
wherever.
used Christianity as an excuse. Manifest destiny and all that was a big
Yeah,
part
we
of that.
we become delusional. We
Yeah.
become deceived. Your old pastors warn a lot of deception, being careful you don't get deceived, because the enticements are so powerful now. The entertainments. And touch on technology earlier when we was talking. Say it's so powerful. When we're dealing with addicted kids addicted to the blue screen. And we don't really know how to deal with it. We're forbidding smartphones in some schools because we don't know what to do.
I think we need to do that.
With the power released through the new technologies.
And when it comes to like the commodity version of Christianity, something to be sold, that naturally finds its way onto the internet, and there are certain things about it that I guess the way they're using the internet is learn how to do that and then are preaching as true as you can. They can be, but even before the internet, like I grew up United Methodist, and like we'd go see the Christian rock band, and you'd get your dopamine blast that way because certain chords were in there, and you were doing the thing with people. I always felt rather silly about the whole thing. I'm a musician, so I enjoyed the music, but the whole kind of made me feel a little bit silly. So I am, I guess, struggling to still find value in, say, like, because there are still find value in what some people are saying that are of that persuasion, if you will, like grew up then and are still in it, because it's not that I want them to fail or whatever. It's just more like, well, instead of the commodity of the dopamine blast and get your rocks off to Jesus Christ and all that stuff, actually start ingraining that is actually in there more and more and more and more, and using the mechanism of the cool sounds that trigger your brain that give you the dopamine blast, but it has to have truth behind it, or else it's just bullshit. And that's sophistry. Like going back to John Vervaeke, you get all the woo-woo stuff, make you feel good. We say the right words, you get the dopamine blast. There's your religious experience. It's like, yeah, well, that's only a small part of it. There's the core lessons that you're getting through it. Like the Gospels, they're sung, sing them, but it's not like, oh yeah, it's such a great song. It's like, no, there's a deep encoded message within that I think is missing from a lot of even commodity spirituality trademark in general, not just Christianity, but in general. 10 years ago was the yoga pants, proofy drink, whatever, commoditized spirituality. Before that it was something else. And I'm not crapping on the Beatles or anything, but they went through their time with everybody had a yogi. If you were some famous person, you had a yogi, right? And he'd follow you around, and everybody's obviously very English, and then just this one guy, it's like, oh, must be the yogi. Whatever.
Listen, all of we students who were on a floor in the dorm at University of Wisconsin watched the Beatles on Ed Sullivan for the first time.
Wow.
And turned the broom closet into a shrine. Condoms hanging, you name it. I mean,
man. Oh boy.
Culture's powerful.
That actually reminds me of when I lived at Claymont, the Claymont property in Jefferson County. Beautiful Washingtonian era structure, but the pagans would come and rent it out for their May Day festivals, and they'd have their parties, condoms hanging from the chandeliers, and the vendors outside, on the front lawn. It was very surreal because you got this very like historic piece, whatever, and then just a bunch of hippies in the woods.
But that was a night that our culture shifted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And hippies were trying to bring love back into the world too.
Free love, yeah.
Well, free love, because
love
they ended up going really far with this idea. So when you were talking about the music and the praising that happens during music, you're right. It shouldn't just be a dopamine fix. There's also an aspect of it where we want to be able to openly worship and not be shy about sharing in communal worship. So, these songs used to be sang in a sacred fashion together in a way of fellowship or worship.
Hymns.
As hymns. And now when it's like a rock concert, there's a bit of a divide there for us, that you're getting this dopa.
Yeah, well, and to a certain extent, if you look
Yeah,
at
this
like
dopamine blast,
the old Southern black churches, or even actually Northern black churches too, with that music, the church music, that being shouting and getting into it, you're doing the same thing, and it's a ritualistic practice, which is a good thing about going to church.
And there's something
is
about the freedom
that
of letting
practice.
yourself go
Well,
completely
sure.
in
And
your love.
but the
To
song,
celebrate. We don't know how
celebrate.
to celebrate anymore.
yeah, and the songs that they're
Yes.
singing is they'll be singing
Simple celebration.
singing actual like Bible stories or the Gospels, or more newly written song about something that's of their direct culture area, which is part of the church too. Culture built civilization,
Right.
any culture, or at least that's the Western things. I think, but you can have that dopamine hit because that's part of the wow. That's why we build churches that big. But then, what's inside of it? Is there like imagine a beautiful girl, but nobody goes to it. Or it's very corrupted and or nasty inside.
Right.
It's the same thing. It's like what's in your worship, man?
Right. Well, heart worship
Yeah.
is a posture. Prayer ultimately comes down to a posture of the heart. Doesn't have to have words about it at all. And that was partially something that helped set the course of my life. When my students again convinced me to the basement of a United Brethren church with.
So it's more about the intentionality rather than just reciting.
Well, and praise is different than worship music. Praise music versus
That's right.
real worship music.
Yeah.
And you can have a dopamine hit, miss the presence of God that might be manifesting in the room.
That might actually still be happening.
Yes.
Even in the rock.
Even manifesting in the room.
Yeah.
Well, it was like what we were talking about earlier before the show, having your cell phone out at a music concert because you want to capture it and take a picture of it.
Right.
But then you're losing the moment of being in it. For
You're
the
not
picture
present.
of it.
Yeah.
You're not
for
there.
the thing to have.
Your authentic self might not be engaged at all.
Yeah.
Because culturally, we're trained to take all these all the time.
Yeah.
How many trillion are posted every day? New images up to the internet, to the clouds?
Yeah, because we're trained to get the dopamine hit from, oh, I can post this later, and we're not fully here. We're not fully in the moment anymore.
Right.
Really soaking it up.
And we're calling it the dopamine hit, but also it's something that we're trying to, or we've been using to replace what he was saying earlier on the video. Replacing that God spectrum with something else.
Something else.
And if you don't have God, and capital G-O-D, little case G-O-D, or whatever, in your life, you're going to try to fill it with something very, very, very deep.
Something else is going to be your God if it's not this transcendent God.
Right.
And that's probably why the first commandment is there. It's kind of like, well, if you don't, then you're going to end up like worshiping something you shouldn't, like yourself, or the separations between you and other people, or and even churches, and in any religion can fall into this. Well, it's our church, they don't do it right, and yada. Even within the church, Sally Jones said this, and
we make little things, tertiary and beyond doctrines, the most important.
Yeah.
And that divides us automatically from another style of Christian.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
We tried, we meaning a team that I worked with in consultation there. How many times has Protestantism divided?
Yeah.
We came down to a minimum of 45,000. Now, what happens to family lines if they divide like that?
Wow.
What happens to family, to authority in a home if there's a divorce?
Yeah.
We don't understand. We don't understand what we've done to the
church
church by our irregular living.
Yeah. Well, the church is, or a family is. I think probably a church is a direct reflection of the family model.
Should be.
Because first it was, evolutionarily speaking, it was family first when it was just a few people together. But then immediately, what do? We want to work together for a worshipful species. And then we built the church. And how do we build it? The way we know, survive, and that's the family. How a family unit works. Builds and it builds and it builds and it builds. And I guess maybe there's only so big something can get before it naturally fractures. I don't personally
Well,
believe
sure,
that, but
that's another whole
you know,
thing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
different than
yeah,
you turning almost private cultural expressions that are valid in Christ for yourself into core things that you feel everybody should be that way. Some of you were touching on that earlier. No, that separates us.
Yeah.
We've had to learn that in raising a larger family. All that we would share with our children quite often was, you have to make Jesus real inside of your skin in your generation. We're still trying to have his reality even more real in ours. And every generation has to do that. Every individual has to do that. A community, local church, Methodist church, another type, would have to, work at that.
yeah.
And then you speak out of only your experience of that. I don't know yours with Jesus today. I don't know yours. You don't know mine.
So there's no condemning. There's more of the focusing on living that way
Yes.
ourselves.
Living the
Yeah.
gospel as you apprehend it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the best you can do. You can't live somebody else's life. You can't have their
No.
experience. You can't have their relationships. You can only have yours. Unfortunately, we are singular beings that do best with each other, but still,
It's part of the beauty.
yeah. The singular individual always trying to build, and then the group's always fracturing back down into single. At the end of the day, when you go to sleep, it's going to sleep. Yeah, we may all go to sleep for dreams that you're having. But that's another episode.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's like we're in the perfect training ground for the perfection of the art of loving.
Yeah.
The completion of love.
Yes.
What does to be made perfect mean? Be made complete.
Fully fulfilled, fully belonging in this way of being that seems to be our birthright. That because there is this state of higher consciousness that we have seen mystics of all various religious traditions and spiritual traditions be able to embody. It's a rare and incredibly special thing, but it seems that we all do have access to this.
Well, it's like a faceted jewel. Faith is the jewel, but we can cut a diamond, see, in many ways, and more.
That's cool.
And more beautiful luminance is brought forth. Brilliance, majesty. Use whatever words with. When you get into realms of talking about beauty, and I've been thinking about that a lot the last 10, 12 years, it's like swimming in the ocean.
It's
And
depthless.
Life with God is like that.
Yes.
Dive in. It's going to be different than plastic swimming pool in your backyard.
Yeah. A little bit more turbulent sometimes, but that's the way of the ocean.
Hey.
That's the way of the world.
In defense of,
we definitely weren't put in the easy mode version of this game.
well, in defense of the little plastic pool in the backyard, it's a good place to learn how to swim when you're young.
No, I shouldn't have.
No, well, no. No.
You're gonna offend all the
You
people
don't want
with
to
baby
stay
pools
in
in
the
the
little
backyard.
plastic pool because that's just your training zone.
Well, or have a
it's-
little God.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
well, first, like
There you
when
go.
teaching kids, when teaching kids about, say, like God or any subject, really, you start with smallest, the simplest, smallest way that you can convey the thought that they can understand, and then build upon that, and then build upon that, and build upon that, and that's what philosophers do, just in a much longer time scale, building on of growing up, and as a species, we have been growing up. Like we're a lot different than we were 4,000 years ago, and I think probably have a more, well, definitely a broader sense of what God is and what our relationship to the universe is, but a more sophisticated way. And I don't want to say like a truer image or anything like that, because I'm not going to box God,
Right.
But
we are growing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and our how we see God does change, but that doesn't mean the nature of God changes. How we interact
There you
with
go.
But I do see that we're growing past this idea, because one of the most common rebuttals against Christianity and other faiths by atheists, for instance, is the idea of God as this old man in the sky, the sky God that everyone's worshiping, and
Sky Daddy, as they say on the
that's
interwebs.
a very easy thing to argue against. That's very easy to dismiss. It's also a notion of Christianity that I don't think actually gets to the heart of what Christianity really is about. Like, this thing is actually infinite. It's the Alpha and the Omega. And for children, yes, it can be, and certainly in the past, in ancient cultures, this was one way. Anthropomorphizing God was one way of making it so that humans could actually try and relate and understand this. Because, talking about this infinite transcendent source, that's really hard to get your head around.
Well, sure.
I remember when I first learned that the universe might be infinite, and I was like, whoa, what a sense of wonder. And then when I learned that God actually could be infinite as well, that made a lot of sense. But even that, it's like, that stretches my brain beyond its capacity. What a wonder to think of.
Right.
Well, we can look at the evolution of worship and religion as far as humans go. First, what was the biggest thing that we could possibly imagine? Well, that was the sky and the ground, right? And then what has the most power, and then we start realizing our relationship with it, and then you get this animal worship, and then the stories of the coyote, or some of the African stories, because the Anansi the spider stories and all that stuff are from much older stories that you could say were religious stories at one point in time. And then we went from the animal to, perfected human forms, whether with animalistic components or your Greek and your Roman gods, and they were fallible. And then finally you get this, very modern idea of, what was it, Michelangelo, God with the finger. Look at that piece of art. Guy's sitting there and he's not even trying. God's reaching as hard as he can to reach, and God's just kind of like, It's like, what? But then we have to go past that, because we can't stop at the man, because we've tried worshiping men with the cult of personalities that killed billions and, I guess over humanity, yes, billions of people, but just within the past 100 or so year, hundreds of millions, by worshiping people and then ideas. And once you get to the
and
world
power
and what is power, and our definition of what power is, because if you ask an engineer, power is just a function of how much work you can do over a certain amount of time. But if you ask the politician what is power, it's, well, how much work can they do on the political spectrum over time? And then if you ask the tyrant, power is being able to do whatever I want. And then you get the tyrannical ideologies that come out of that, and the pseudo religions that emerge out of those ideologies. Now God is, yes, no longer the guy with the finger, but is so far unrecognizable from anything that, say, is close to the nature of God.
In the nature,
it's more an idea or a particular.
Well, we got away from the love aspect.
Unconditional love. One of the clips might touch on that.
Yes.
Agape.
So, and speaking of atheists, we're now going to check out an atheist's argument against free will. And he's basically suggesting here that if you believe that you have free will, then you're wrong if you believe in God, because actually God's controlling everything. So it's either random or there's a God. And so we'll listen to this argument here, and this is from Cosmic Skeptic. His name is Alex. I forget his last name, but you guys can check this. As I was saying, the link is in the details. So we're going to jump on over here now.
Argument against free will, in my view, we can build an argument, I think, from a law of logic. The proposition that P must either be true or false, and it can't be both, it can't be neither. We can simply ask a question of any kind of mental activity. Is it determined or is it not? That is it determined by anything else, or is it completely undetermined by anything? If it's undetermined by anything, then it's random, and you're by definition not in control of that which is random. If it's determined by something, then it's either determined by something further inside your mind, or it's determined by something external to your brain. If it's determined by something external to yourself, if that's what's determining the action, then clearly you're not in ultimate control of that action. If it's something inside of yourself, yourself somewhere, then all you do is push the problem back and you ask the question again, is that thing determined or is it indeterminate? Either of which you are completely out of control in. If you say that it terminates in something like a soul, people like to do this. They say, well, look, with a religious philosophy, we have the benefit of introducing a soul. That doesn't solve anything. It's not a matter of having to explain the mechanism by which the soul brings about actions. That may well be a mystery. But if it is the case that whatever it is that's doing that is either determined or it's not, and that if it's not, it's random and therefore out of your control, and that if it is, it ultimately terminates in something outside of yourself or something random, and both of which are out of your control, free will cannot exist. The argument against...
Okay. So he speaks really fast. That wasn't even sped up. He talks as fast as Ben Shapiro, whose show he's on in this clip. And he's arguing against free will, obviously. I feel that, it seems that this happens a lot in the universe, that everything is paradox. It's not so much either or as it is both and. And so I think that it might be that we are typically led by our baser instincts and seemingly random circumstances and triggers and events. But I believe if we come to know our intrinsic interconnection with that sense of oneness that is accessible for all human beings, then I think you do begin to have free will at that point, and you are acting, you could say, in co-creation with God. God is now able to live through you. And if God has the capacity, if God is everything, and we are, you could say we're like a dream of God's, we're in the mind of God, then it really is God acting through us, but he's able to be both the individual and himself as well. He's even able to forget himself while he's the individual so that he can remember. I think that challenges this notion of it having to be one or the other that Alex is getting at here. What do you guys think about that clip?
What comes to my mind is the verse in the letter to the believers, the early Christians in Ephesus, Ephesians 2:10, that we were born and then awakened again from above to simply walk out the works uniquely prepared for each of us by God beforehand. It isn't about us striving even, but coming into relationship,
grace,
and engagement, and a working partnership, could you say?
Vervaeke would say agent arena relationship if you're to remove the terminology of God out of it, but basically agent in its environment. So if everything's God and that intention for us, and not just something outside of us dictating, and it's not just something inside of us, it's a relationship between, well, the one thing, but the two. The interplay, but counter forces, pulling through, which I don't really feel that he gave any credit to. It's just this, well, it's either this thing or it's this thing. Well, it's not. If God is everything, nothing that is me is not God. So, and I'm constantly in interaction with it, and on the baser end, the grosser end, interaction with this chair, microphone, with this, I can table if I wanted to. I won't say, God was like, well, I wanted you to move the table at that point in time, because it's not coming from down, just.
Yeah, so
the
we're
works
relational.
prepared beforehand, see, would be your unique life that you will live out. I don't like the word works there, almost. Like you being fully your being. In him, with him, through him. Per ipso et cum ipso et in ipso.
I think that the Taoists nailed this when they used that symbol, the yin and the yang. So we're seeing the interplay of the interrelation of opposites. You can't have light without dark. You can't have up without down, happy without sad, so forth. And the yin and the yang is a total unit. There's this side and there's this side, but it's actually part of this one whole thing. And that is actually, that symbol not only depicts the underlying nature of reality, but the highest way for a human being to relate in that reality.
I see the Holy Spirit slowly working with the Church of the West to bring them out of all the dualities.
Yes.
that we have fractured Christ into, we could say.
Yes.
And a number of artists over the years, Morris Graves in particular on the West Coast, he's dead now, but he said a day would come when there would be that reunifying and a coming back into the understanding of, hear, O Israel, and know that the Lord thy God is one. One, at oneness. It doesn't take away the differences held within a circle. Like the yin-yang symbol. I would always chide my students, they come in tattooed with it, they have no clue where that came from.
Right.
It came from the tattoo shop.
Yeah.
Well,
but there's
came from a
almost like
culture.
It was in the book.
there's
that
a
had
deep
a core.
recognition that there's something right about that when you see that symbol.
Yeah,
though.
exactly.
Yeah. Without even knowing where it comes from or what it is, people get that tattoo.
be
'cause they
careful.
automatically get it.
Yeah, be careful what you mark your body with, particularly when you're dealing with like symbolic. I'm weird. I'm a Christian that believes in magic, but not like the hocus pocus magic, but the magic of symbols and intentions behind symbols. Like I only have one tattoo on my body, and it's a bass clef on my shoulder, and I'm a bass player through and through. Maybe if I didn't get it, get the tattoo, maybe I would have more money. But
But you did it for your cherish and your love of something rather than just for like an image projection or anything like that.
Yeah, no, it's just a mental reminder and a mark for myself of what I am. Being a bass player is more than just step into bass.
And I like it when people have tattoos that have a deep meaning to them, and you can tell it's not just to look good or appear a certain way. Like it has genuine meaning to them. It's something that they live their life by. It's something to remind them of something special to them.
Yeah.
Like
Generally, they mark moments, deep moments in people's lives. I was asked to curate a show from 7 of the tattoo shops in Martinsburg, West Virginia. Fascinating people, fascinating artists. Some of the most fascinating I've ever met. Even 3 generations when it was illegal to tattoo, and you had to know what barbershop to go to, and down in the basement was the tattoo artist.
Wow. Oh, cool.
Well, and actually, the tattooing cultures, tattoos depending on what period, sometimes, every person will have this tattoo if I'm an adult, and if you don't have that tattoo, you either really messed up or you get another tattoo to signify something else. And it's symbols to convey messages that just plain words maybe can't necessarily get at. Yeah. And I think we can do this with our behaviors and how we behave in the world as well, because you can go around telling people about Jesus' way and all this stuff and put it into words, and you can also go out there and do it. And we've all met people that just their presence, they have this presence or have this aura around them, or we can see it. You can see it. We have a sense for that. We really see it in them, but you don't have words for it. I think the French have a word for that, not having the word for it. I don't know what it is, but I know the French have it. But yeah, so this, I want to say returning to Christ or anything like that we're experiencing culturally is more of, I'm seeing more in the action of it opposed to just the words of it or
So a new trend, rather than it being a new trend that's become popular, seeing more people actually living out a way of being, or attempting, at least trying.
And I won't less of churches popping up and people getting together that way, or more just people embracing it in their day-to-day lives.
Being attracted to the way of being that Christ embodied. I think, in fact,
taking it personal.
Yeah, and just realizing the deep importance of it for ourselves and for our wider culture. And I do find it important to talk about these things. But yet again, it's not just the one thing or the other thing. It's, no. It's the both of them and the other that is created out of it. It's that interrelation.
Or emerges out of it.
Speaking of a relation, we're going to look at a video from Rupert Spira now, who is quite an interesting individual. And so let's switch on over here. I'm going to talk about the powerful wisdom of the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart and read a passage for us. Go ahead and get that rolling.
Hello, everyone. I wanted to make this short video about Christian mysticism, mainly just because I love the Christian mystics, and I'm always happy to have an excuse to speak of them, but also because I have an online weekend coming up in May where we will be exploring the perennial non-dual understanding with particular reference to Christian mysticism. When I was 7 years old, I apparently said to my mother that I thought that our life was God's dream, that everything was God's dream, and that our job in our lives was to make God's dream as beautiful a dream as possible. Well, as I grew up, I soon forgot or overlooked this childhood intuition and became immersed in growing up. But later on, in my mid to late teens, this intuition awoke in me again, and I set out on a path of inner exploration to try to re-find what I had intuited in my early childhood. And this took me on a great journey of exploration through Ouspensky's teachings, the Sufi tradition, the Mevlevi turning, Rumi's poetry, to the classical Advaita Vedanta tradition, where I learnt and practiced mantra meditation for 20 years or so, followed by the direct path teachings of Ramana Maharshi and Atmananda Krishna Menon, and to the tantric teachings, especially those of the Kashmir Shaivite tradition. But now, some 45 years later, I find myself returning more and more often to my original Christian tradition in which I was brought up. And although I had to take this great journey, this exploration through the Eastern spiritual traditions in order to really discern the meaning that lies at the heart of the Christian tradition, I now find that when I come back to the Christian mystics, their writings are charged with an understanding that speaks as powerfully, if not more powerfully to me than any other tradition. So I just wanted to share some of these writings from you, and in particular from Meister Eckhart, the 12th century Christian mystics whose writings I have always loved and are so consistent with the understanding of the great Eastern wisdom traditions. So I thought I'd share a couple of my favorite passages from this book on his selected writings. This is a passage about the most powerful form of prayer. The most powerful form of prayer, and the one which can virtually gain all things, and which is the worthiest work of all, is that which flows from a free mind. The freer the mind is, the more powerful and worthy, the more useful, praiseworthy, and perfect the prayer and the work become. A free mind can achieve all things, But what is a free mind? A free mind is one which is untroubled and unfettered by anything, which has not bound its best part to any particular manner of being or devotion, and which does not seek its own interest in anything, but is always immersed in God's most precious will, having gone out of what is its own. I love this last phrase, having gone out of what is its own. And this is so so close in understanding to the meditation tradition, the Eastern meditation tradition, which requires the emptying of the mind of all that is not essential to it, leaving its bare, essential, irreducible essence, pure consciousness, pure awareness. And Meister Eckhart goes on to explain this in more detail, how the mind, how the soul, in his language, empties itself of itself, and in doing so progressively surrenders itself to God's presence. This self-emptying is really the essence of the soul's prayer to God, and is, of course, indeed the essence of the great meditation practices of the Eastern traditions. So I read again from Meister Eckhart. Just as we spoke before of emptiness and bareness, saying of the soul that the more pure, naked and poor she is, the fewer creatures she possesses, and the emptier of all things she is which are not of God, then the more purely she grasps God, and does so in Him, becoming one with God, and gazing upon Him as He gazes upon her, face to face, being transformed into His likeness. I'm going to read that again. Just as before we spoke of emptiness and bareness, saying of the soul that the more she is pure, naked and poor, the fewer creatures she possesses, and the emptier of all things she is which are not of God. Then the more purely she grasps God, and does so in Him, becoming one with God, and gazing upon Him as He gazes upon her, face to face, being transformed into His likeness. I now say exactly the same of likeness and the fire of love. For to the extent that something is more like something else, to that extent it rushes towards it, and does so more swiftly, and is filled with greater happiness and joy on account of its movement. This beautiful description of the soul surrendering itself, rushing towards, so to speak, God's presence, and in doing so being gradually divested of its own personal attributes, and in its place the joy that is the nature of God's presence shining forth. I now say exactly the same of likeness and the fire of love. For to the extent that something is more like something else, to that extent it rushes towards it, and does so more swiftly, and is filled with greater happiness and joy on account of its movement. The further it departs from itself, and from everything which is not that towards which it hastens, and the more unlike itself it becomes, and unlike all that is not its goal, to that extent, it becomes ever more like the thing towards which it is drawn. This is so resonant of the Sufi mystic Jalaluddin Rumi, who describes this same process of our personal being, our apparently individual being divested of its limitations, and as it does so, seeming to expand and being revealed eventually as God's infinite being, when he says flow down and down and down in ever widening rings of being. This is exactly the same process that Meister Eckhart is describing. The further it departs from itself and from everything which is not that towards which it hastens, and the more unlike itself it becomes, and unlike all that is not its goal, to that extent it becomes ever more like the thing towards which it is drawn. Since likeness flows from the one, and attracts, and draws by, and in the power of the one, sorry, I need to read that again. Since likeness flows from the one, and attracts, and draws by and in the power of the one, neither peace nor satisfaction comes to that which attracts or to that which is attracted, until they become one in the one.
Place to pause, guys. Thoughts on that? Meister Eckhart's incredible. You shared with me
Right.
Meister Eckhart's book of Darkness and Light.
Right. Not many American Christians, whether in leadership or just in congregation on the corner, has either heard of him, or if they have, it's been in a negative light. Like, be careful of him, the mystics, don't go near him. And it gives me gratitude to have been raised actually in pre-Vatican Roman Catholicism, because the mystics were not denied. They were shared, they were spoken of. I don't know how I was introduced to Thomas Merton. Father was a painter, very much an intellectual party animal, drank way too much, but ended up a cloistered monk that they built a forest retreat to live in, a cinder block little building, because he felt called to that kind of solitude. Not isolation from the community, but solitude and engagement with nature. And his spiritual directors fortunately allowed him to examine the religions of the East and even get to know some of them personally. And
like Suzuki, he had a close
Suzuki,
relationship
right.
with. Zen
And
teacher.
did not see any need, like we're hearing here, to leave the Christian tradition at all. By the time he died, which was an unusual death, perhaps electrocuted or cardiac arrest, he plugged in a fan in his hotel room after he had given his last address, which is now a book available, at a World Conference of Religions in Bangkok, I believe. Went back to his hotel room, plugged in the electric fan, and died. Is gone. Had one of the deepest understandings of, again, non-duality.
Yes.
From the Christian historical perspective as well as from the Eastern religions.
Mystical Christianity's embrace of a non-dual perspective has always fascinated me, and that re-fascinated me with Christianity in general once I started to read some of the mystics, such as Thomas Merton. Choosing to Love the World, that book. You have a copy of that. My mother gave me that book years and years ago. I don't know where she heard about Thomas Merton, but this renegade Catholic priest that was such a mover and shaker in his times, because he tackled the current events of his day as well as embraced other spiritual traditions
I've been
like Zen
rereading
Buddhism.
reading his essays again.
Have you?
Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. I mean, he was as prophetic of a watchman as they come.
Yeah.
And again, his spiritual directors saw that that was the will of God for him.
Mm.
And he taught a lot of novices, I think, to open up,
Mm-hmm.
just simply open up to God.
So rather than like a literalist interpretation of the Bible, Christian mystics definitely kind of take a deeper tact, don't they?
It's having direct experiences with, quote, God.
Yes.
An actual experience of
That's it.
Yes.
Yeah, and so with this last video, some things stood out to me. You know, the depiction of the soul. You know, this a bare of clothing and no possessions, or but that, you know, that almost seems like, oh, it's so horrible. But what it
Metaphor, though, isn't it?
It's
Deep
metaphor for not being cluttered with all the other stuff
the-
in your life. You know, like talked about what is the I am at the person or all the identity.
Oh,
You know,
yeah. Not the I am this or the I am that, but the sense of I amness
the word.
itself, that primary sense of
Yes.
consciousness.
Self
Self,
is the word.
yeah.
Yeah, those words they just leave sometimes. But self, think of self as the sticky ball that holds relationships. You know, because we define ourself usually by the relationships we have. You know, I'm a son. Some people are fathers, mothers, nurses, taxi driver,
What I do for
musician,
a living.
and that's cluttering all of it up.
Mhm.
And then when we're talking about the soul here being poor and bare, it's not having those clutterings over top of the self, and
All
then
those layers of egoic identification.
so the soul
right.
self is
Right.
then can look at, you know, gaze into and be gazed into really, and ever quickening well in direction towards the oneness.
Right.
So this emptiness opening up the space for actual, like, looking through the lens,
Right.
growing interaction and growing together. You know, because like I think one of my hangups with, you know, Protestantism is seemed like, you know, Martin Luther in that period of time, and don't get me wrong, you know, it was bad then. You know, most of the world just died. You know, like it was some pretty bad times, but it was this lowering of God. You scum of the earth. You'd be lucky if God comes down and graces you. Better work hard so you can deserve it when He does. But then there's another end of, you know, Christianity that experiences this. Oh, we have to up and reach up and reach up and go grab them. But it's a both. You know, it's yet again, and God's doing most of the here. You know, we're just the guy sitting there with a limp finger, ungrateful most of the time for the reaching. We're cluttered with all of our crap and can't even see how important it is to have this most primary relationship. You know, which if you go far enough into the one, then it's a personal relationship, right? The goal is to, you know, get back to God, right?
I didn't hear about repentance and a personal faith for 28 years. That isn't what was being understood and emphasized in pre-Vatican II Roman Catholicism. Attend or else. The priest didn't even face the people. The altar turned around with Vatican II, and the priest had to face the people.
Yeah.
I saw the agony of villagers learning to sing hymns in English. We all sang in Latin.
Oh, yeah.
Which was beautiful in its own way. But no, I saw plaster saint statues being carried out and then dragged by tractors to a ditch behind the cemetery.
Wow.
Because there was the lowering of what had turned into worship to dead people. Okay? And hopefully an elevation of Christ again. And like begets like, the phrase that came up as he was sharing. See, if we endeavor to live and take time to live in the presence of God, whatever your practices might be in your prayer life or worship life might be, to have a sense of His presence. say, you will regain his likeness.
Well, I guess, yeah, if, you know, be like like begets
Like.
and, well,
Hang out with the wrong crowd? What happens?
yeah, and in order to be the likeness of God, you have to be like God. It's one of those weird things that should make sense and should just seem like it's this spiraling out of
Another
nowhere
paradox.
thing, but it works though, because yet again, you know, well, if you're hanging out with a bunch of dummies and doing nothing but messing up and breaking stuff and doing all that
Mockers.
stuff,
Cynics.
Yeah.
the Bible shakers, thumpers that don't bother to open up and read read other parts other than the parts that are like, yeah, let me hit you in the head with this.
There's a lot of fundamental extremism in a lot of different directions right now. We see it far left, the far right.
It doesn't matter the
it's
religion,
everywhere.
creed, or cause. There's always the threat of that being a thing, because as you
Well
go,
put. Yeah.
We just don't understand.
The cause can become our new God.
Sometimes we don't
Yeah.
understand. See,
Yeah.
I like Paul's. He rejoiced even if the gospel was being proclaimed for filthy lucre, as the old King James puts it, money. But the motivation of that preacher is nothing but money, man.
Mm. Yeah.
I've had to deal with young emerging, some of them eventually pastors in Africa, because it's a career to go after, because when you have nothing and you see that you can go that way and have something and be regarded and even revered, even as a tribal leader.
Oh,
then,
you're a rock star. I
Yeah.
think that's the reason why the priest should be
Right.
poor and chaste and not have a job, is because, well, like, you've got the direct conduit to God, baby. That's like, you're a freaking rock star. Everybody, the ladies want you, the men want to be you.
Right.
The temptation's there.
Yeah.
I can understand why the priests aren't allowed to, or traditionally speaking, aren't allowed to be in this world that we occupy, and they have to separate themselves because, well, the temptation.
Some priests
Some,
too.
yeah.
See, the Orthodox end didn't go that way.
Yeah, well,
Yeah. And they still face the same way their congregation is facing when they preach, right? So they're looking at God together.
It's a very, very
It's a
high
very
view
diff-
in the
yeah.
Orthodox end that can be twisted too and whatnot.
Sure.
But,
Yeah.
or some like the iconography of, like, say, like the saints and stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
Are you worshiping the dead person, or are you using it as a tool to point to what you're truly worshiping?
Which
an
is what it's
icon,
supposed
yeah,
to
That's
be
what
for, right?
icons were intended for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and, that's ultimately up
Yeah.
to the individual as well. It's like,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
I don't worship the cross. Now, in part of the religious experience, the cross plays a part, but it's a point to
Right.
something.
To help you understand
Personally,
something.
for me, it's the balancing the point between understanding and suffering. Right there. That's what it means.
Well-
That's how it helps me.
Or his will and my will, and
yeah.
where they cross.
That surrender.
Oh, and
that will.
most of the time, my will's suffering, and then his will's understanding. So
So
there you go.
So we haven't really discussed, but we've touched on this idea that we can turn our causes or other things into gods for ourselves.
become
greed,
idolatrous.
power, materialism, whatever social movement we're a part of, becomes a way for us to find belonging. So the import of having a transcendent ideal of God, this ultimate thing that none of us can ever reach, that the ultimate good that gives us this infinite room to grow towards something that seems to be very helpful for us as a species, and in fact seems to be essential for us as species to be able to maintain any kind of modicum of peace on this planet.
Well, and it has to be founded in love and the agapic love, because if it's not, that's how you get, like, communism, where the revolution and the cause is what you're worshiping, and you never attain true cause. And okay, you may have won the revolution time, but now you're the old right-wing way that needs to be disposed of, because there is no grounding in love.
Yeah.
And I was listening to it was just a guy sitting there talking about his opinions on the upbringing of socialist, theorists as well as dictators. They all really had something in common. They all kind of started out within the church, usually Lutherans, but not all the time. So they developed this altruistic mindset, which isn't all bad. I don't personally believe in altruism because I believe even if I do something completely selflessly, I still get something out of it. There, you know.
I
But
like that. That's built into the universe, though.
But
yeah.
the idea of altruism then perverted with the, well, no, like I am despicable and I don't, deserve this, and then externalized onto other people, but without the morality of, say, those religious practices. Get very, very bitter people that become lazy, hence the socialist and the state and other people for me. If you look at Marx, I can't think of anybody else that was more lazy than him. Really, like if you go and you look up his history, he was just left and right,
beyond
and nasty,
lazy, but hateful, willing to do mass violence
yeah.
to achieve
it gets to
his
that.
ends.
Yeah,
it
yeah.
gets to
Well,
that.
there's no wonder that one of the 7 deadly sins and probably one of the worst is sloth.
And
either
envy.
you don't want to work or you don't want to think. And then, well, I don't have anything, which is that, that lust or that envy. So now I get resentful, and that's the wrath going in there, and then it builds and it builds and it builds. And if you have, say, an altruistic mindset, say from Christianity, that's one thing that I don't believe in altruism as we see it. I believe in, much as you can, but you have that mindset, but then you remove the morality out of it, and you now don't have the sacredness of person. Christianity, it's the person. That it's agape is the love that makes the person out of a, it makes the person out of the slave, out of the woman, out of the crippled man, out of like the people who weren't just ill people at the time. And if we're not careful, and I'm saying this now too, even within what I'm seeing, that I'm hopeful about this, turn to Christ, not necessarily Christianity. If we're not careful, we can mess up just the same way and become bitter and resentful and awful, and then, well, our causes change and get pulled into this, all this stuff that's happening. You got to be mad at this person for this reason, and mad at everybody because they're killing old Gaia, and the weird sick Earth worship that's happening there. Respect the Earth, and for all intents and purposes, that's mom. We grow on her, we grow out of her. Everything is physically me came from this. Well, and then all the other stars and all that stuff, and then ultimately from God, which is everything. But humans are horrible. Like we're going back to the humans are horrible thing that causes the problems to begin with. And I think if we're careful enough in our communities to not become bitter and resentful, this can work. But if we become bitter and resentful, it's all going to crash again.
Which seems to happen every time that we try and change the world by changing the outer and attacking others and blaming them as the causes of all that's happening, rather than turning internally and saying, how can I be that change that I wish to see in this world? Which, if more of us were doing that, I think that we really could increase the amount of peace and goodwill on this.
Try to shape them through law rather than through love.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yep, through external means, trying to change the world rather than recognizing that internally is where we have the most control.
That's the whole fulcrum thing we're on right now in this.
And being upset at people for not living according to the way that we think they should, not being as good as they could be in this world, when we ourselves are not exhibiting that way of being. We just keep blaming the others and the outer. It's their fault. It's that thing.
Mentioned, law and controlling people with law. I've had a thought that's been running through my head for like the past month or so. It's like, laws are only written when men mess up, or man messes up, or humans mess up. So, if you go back and you read the Bible in the Old Testament, all these rules and laws we get are because, well, I get the followers of God of the messed up, and there needed to be some laws and rules written and like shown us. And laws are never like, oh, we'll make things better by putting in this law. It's like, no, you really messed up. Like, Moses went to the top of the hill, came down with some laws, and was just like, melted down all your gold. Now you're worshiping this golden calf. Okay, I'll be back. I got to go get some more. Like, got to get some different ones that are going to cover this, because I thought we were past this, but apparently we're not. Man messing up again. It's like the whole Old Testament is just man messing up over and over and over and over again, and learning and then reverting back. But every time the reversion back happens, it gets I don't want to say better, because that's the best word, but it gets man gets a little bit better at being in this world with this relationship with God, evolving their understanding of God, coming to grips with the nature of God.
which seems to be something we'll never be done doing, huh?
Well, hey, man. It shouldn't be. It'd be terribly boring not
Yeah, if
to.
we're
Like,
lucky,
everything's
yeah.
just perfect and right. And
I love that idea. We have infinite room to grow. There's no cap on our potential betterment as a species. God gives us a transcendent ideal to move towards, to journey towards.
Perfection, completion. Made perfect.
Completely
Whole.
clear of our own ongoing inner mental monologue that we're always so wrapped up in, get our preferences and our expectations and attachments out of the way and be a clear vessel for that light to live through.
Purity. See,
Purity.
Pure means no additives.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
yeah, it's like an opposite of an attainment, like attaining purity, right? Because, well, you attain the impurities, they come into you.
The additives.
Then the additives, and then, well, those, and hopefully we're never quite done. Maybe with this
isn't,
physical,
no.
fleshy,
No, yeah.
physical,
Human
fleshy
nature.
realm.
Yeah. We don't have to be done if it's more of like an attending kind of thing in a caring sort of way to life.
A gardener's work is never done.
Yes.
And I hope to be in this garden as long as I can be. And if there is something to reincarnation one way or another, I'd be down to come back down and do it all over again if it was required of me.
We serve a
Whether or not-
creative God who's ongoing, so I expect to be busy, not sitting in a rocker.
Yeah, not sitting on a throne. What is it? With
In service.
the Baptist people who have the comics. What is that? The Westboro Baptist people comics, and they're like, you can sit on thrones and have white robes.
Oh,
and
boy.
it's just
Hey,
like,
we-
that looks like hell to me.
Well,
And this is how perhaps Christianity got a bad name. This kind of
Well, throughout time too, it's like every
well, we're imperfect beings. This is what happens, right? We're in the midst
there's
of the
no
story.
perfect religion. I just think this one, this avenue, this branch, this way is the right one for me. I think it is for everybody else too, but I'm not the one to go forcing it on people, and I'm not some mystic scholar that's been doing it forever either. I'm just some schmo down the street that happens to have a podcast with his buddy.
Right.
All
All the religions in this world seem to be imperfect in that they are created by humans that are imperfect beings, but the way of being exhibited, embodied by Christ seems to be the highest example of human potential that we've ever seen. It transcends our understanding. What a radical, beautiful expression of what is possible for us that we've been given. So let's jump on over to another video now, guys. This one is an interview with Tom Holland, historian.
Not the Spider-Man.
Not the
actor.
Spider-Man guy, but the historian, famous historian. He's got a great podcast. And he's talking about the Christian history of the West. So let's take a little quick view of this here.
And so to that extent, to the degree that we now conceive of democracy as very much being about rights and human rights, it's more comes from the Christian tradition than from the Athenian one.
Yes, and so the temptation is to say our democracy is, we derive it from ancient Athens. We don't.
Right.
I mean, it's to say we use that word because it's something that the word democracy is taken up. It's written about by Aristotle. It's written about by Cicero. These are texts that pass into the mainstream of European intellectual discourse, and so people in universities are studying these texts, and people are familiar with Greek words like democracy, aristocracy, monarchy, and so on as types of government. But the people who are doing this, people who are studying it in universities, Aristotle and Cicero, are Christians, and so they're colouring it with their assumptions, and we have inherited that.
And as you sort of dove, in a sense, yourself into that ancient world of Greece and Rome and so on, you obviously tell the story in Dominion how those preconceptions you had began to be challenged, and you, as it were, in all kinds of areas, started to see the ways in which the Western world is so very different to the values and traditions and everything else, and started to put together the pieces that so many of these seem to actually, that the change seemed to be at that point where Christianity arose in the Middle East.
Again, yes, essentially everything changes with Christianity, I think. and when I say everything, I mean everything within countries that have been Christian for centuries, millennia. But having said that, I also think that the influence of Christianity on the world more generally has been profound too. But particularly in a country like Britain that has been Christian for a millennium and more, the saturating effects are so profound that we don't recognize them. And that's not surprising. I mean, it's only to be expected.
And yet that thing you said about the assumption that, well, hey, we're all humans, you know, there is this sort of innate human morality. That you find that all the time today. I mean, British Humanist Association is essentially, that is its core doctrine. You know, we don't need Christianity, we don't need anything, we just need to recognize our common humanity. So what do you say to those folk when they sort of say, hang on a minute, Tom, it's not all down to Christianity?
I think that that the modern West is unique in its cultural arrogance, in its assumption that its beliefs are universal, that everyone shares in them, and that if they don't, then they should. There's no sense that they're culturally contingent. Most people in the past were aware of that, but we are uniquely arrogant, and the reason for that is complicated and very much tied up with the emergence and history of Christian theology. And essentially, what we have as a result of the distinctive emergence of theological concepts in Latin Christendom is an idea that the world can be divided into two dimensions, the dimension of the secular and a dimension that we call religion. So the idea that there is something called religion that is separate from everything else in society is a distinctively Western one that is theologically determined. And again, this is something that I became very, very aware of when writing about, say, or the Greeks. If you think of, say, an introduction to ancient Greece, there will probably be a chapter on religion, Greek religion, and it will tell you the story of the gods, and there'll be something about priests and temples and cults, and then there might be something about the family or the city or warfare or agriculture or something like that, as though there is a dimension that can be of the supernatural that can be separated off from that, but it can't, because for the Greeks, the dimension of the supernatural and the dimension of the natural are as interfused as gin and tonic are in gin and tonic. They can't be kind of separated out like that. Whereas we do have that assumption.
Relatively new for assumptions.
In a way, it's a brilliant way for us to proselytize our values, because although it's bred of Christian theology, it's kind of ended up cannibalizing institutional Christianity. In a sense, the conceit of the West is that it's transcended Christianity to become purely universal, purely global, and therefore it can market itself in those terms. But its values, its assumptions, its ethics remain palpably bred of the marrow of Christianity. And I think that we've been able to get away with this conceit for as long as we have done, because we're the products of societies that for 200 or 300 years have been globally hegemonic. But as that ends, as the West's economic, financial, military, cultural power recedes, so I think our ability to assume that our values, our assumptions are universal will go into retreat as well.
Yeah, when we don't have the power, in a sense, to say to China, you have to adopt these human rights.
Right, so human rights is an absolutely classic example. People talk about universal human rights. Now, universal, what is universal? Universal, it means, in Greek, is Catholic. So what we're talking about is Catholic human rights. people never put, don't translate it in that, but that's what we're talking about. It's so instinctive that we don't even recognize that. And human rights are Catholic in the sense of that they emerge as a coherent philosophical idea in the 12th century in the emergent universities of the Latin West. And our assumption that they are somehow, they float in the ether, that they are things that are just there, is as, it's as far-fetched as believing in angels or the Trinity or anything. I mean, it's absolutely a theological concept. But whereas the Trinity or angels are clearly Christian categories, Christian concepts, Christian myths, if you want, and have to be accepted as such, they can't escape their Christian character. The idea of human rights can. And so people can say everyone should have this understanding of human rights.
They can separate the gin and the tonic.
Yes.
Try to.
Do you think so? Another guest on this series, Graham Tomlin, he's also sort of the captain of the Seen and Unseen ship. And his line that he pulls out a lot is that society is infinitely worse off if there's no overarching story. And I think, seeing as he's a bishop in the Church of England, he'd be very comfortable in being explicit of the Christian story. But I think my question then, what have we lost in separating the gin from the tonic? What have we lost in trying to secularize what you say are theological concepts that haven't just appeared in a vacuum? Do you think there's been a loss there, or do you think it's okay to sort of squeeze the juice out of the lemon and then discard the lemon?
Well, I quite like living in a secular state.
Yeah.
I think it serves the interests of a multi-faith society pretty well.
Yeah.
But the problem is, I think, that it requires not looking at the foundations, the kind of ideological underpinnings of secularism too closely. Because if you do that, you realize that actually it is still, it's not neutral. The conceit of secularism is that the secular state is neutral, can be neutral between religions, but it can't, because it's inherently biased towards a Christian perspective. And it requires other ways of comprehending the dimension of the supernatural to conform to a Christian shape. Because, say, a Muslim in Britain has freedom of religion.
Yes.
But inherent in that idea that there's freedom of religion is that Islam is a religion. But if the category of a religion that is something distinct from a secular space is Christian, then it requires Islam in Britain to become that much more Christian, to shape itself to a kind of Christian understanding, basically to become a religion. And that may be fine, but I think it does generate all kinds of stresses and tensions that we've seen over the past few decades. That it imposes demands on Muslims that can make Islam a kind of uncomfortable bedfellow for secularism, as you would expect, because it's the height of arrogance to assume that a civilization that is just as complex and rich and sophisticated as Christian civilization. Basically, the conceit of secularism is that the whole of Islam can be brought into the big tent. But that's can it?
Well, culturally and theologically, no. And this isn't like deriding Islam or anything like that, but that's just a matter of fact. Can't say in England, yes, okay, you can worship however you want to worship. Well, if it gets to the point where it's like, well, okay, but we don't see a separation between our religion and how we should be living, so we're going to start ruling ourselves the way we naturally would, culturally and religiously speaking. And there's a lot of conflict between these. And it really, I'm not a fan of this idea of secularism. I understand I live in a very secular country, but the ripping out of, faith from everyday activity has been useful. I have a lot of stuff, but it's detrimental to itself because it allow other things to come in and break it apart and break a people apart because we're already halfway fractured between our political, social life and our spiritual, personal, as well as spiritual. It used to just be the same thing for all of humanity and is in most places in the world other than the West.
It is definitely
and westernized
dominant.
countries like Japan.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and Islam, doesn't have the concept of secularization. So them marrying into a country that does have that secularism doesn't work unless it starts Christianizing itself to some degree, because secularism is a product of Christianity.
You have to be secular. No. No, you're going to let me live here anyway, so no, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. I'm not going to convert to your religion because I have mine.
That's a big difference between Christianity and Islam. There is that secularism comes out as a result of Christianity's acceptance of many different kinds of people. This idea of secularism, to where many different religions and peoples, different cultures can actually intersperse or enmesh with each other,
and
is something that wouldn't come about without Christianity.
And the concept of secularism came about after like a significant portion of the world died, and a destroying of a whole lot of monasteries and other things, and for certain things, I think the governments should kind of stay out of people's personal religious lives. But I think I don't think we should be a theocracy or anything like that. I think we should recognize the cobbles under our feet that we walk on a little bit better, be more appreciative of the walls that are around us that are built out of Christianity, and not throw I don't want to say throw the baby out with the bathwater, and the bathwater being the perverse ends, and by perverse I mean just self-destructive ends of secularism.
Even Richard Dawkins came forth as a cultural Christian recently.
Right.
So even while he's still an atheist, he embraces the values that Christianity has given the modern world.
Slowly, we're coming back to the Hebraic, which wasn't dualistic and wasn't divided into sacred and secular. That's why they see the expression of Judaism as a life that would be tilted toward doing something to better all. Save one life, you save them all.
Yeah.
That story. And we don't understand who we call the father of the faith, Abraham, who heard, out in the desert, voice, found a woman as daring as himself to leave with him, and Terah, his father, went out with them from Haran until they got to Haran. Then Terah died there and was buried, and then the whole Abrahamic. But that was an in sundry lot who were not called Hebrews or Jews. They were fed up with human sacrifice to Nimrod and all.
Yeah.
In
We
Ur
talked
of the
about this in the last
Chaldees.
episode too.
We've got to get all the
That
way
human-
back, as you hear me harp on sometimes, to Abrahamic understanding. There's a verse that says, when the Son of God returns, will he find faith on the earth? If you dig into the languages there's an article, will he find the faith? And it references the type of heart trust evidenced by Abraham and Sarah.
Heart trust. What do you mean by that?
Well, the Messianic believers in Israel, when they did a version of the New Testament and all for themselves, they had long, heated dialogue with theologians and all. They decided not to use the word faith because they felt it carried too much from European theologians. That, again, looking back, where do you trust from? Your head?
Nice.
You trust from that deeper place we've been talking about, and that the mystics tonight were pointing us to. Deep within, where Jesus of Nazareth said, it's where you recoil if you see someone killed or an accident, hopefully. You have that much left in you, that you would be repulsed by death and brutality, violence. We've lost that. We've been losing that. That's where faith springs from, not in a set of words turned into doctrines, belief system. It's the heart. I mean, they went out in trust.
Yeah.
In the midst of great hostility, and I don't think we can even imagine the forms of idolatry going on.
Mm. Well, the child sacrifice was just one horrid example
Right.
of what
And
was
you
going on.
said that you covered that recently on one of your podcasts.
In our last episode, we did
Moloch.
cover Moloch.
And the digital or social Moloch,
Yeah, right.
Moloch and media.
We
How Moloch
sac-
is still
well,
alive today.
yeah, we sacrifice our innocence.
What are you
on-
giving your worth to?
Yeah.
Mm.
Your highest worth to? That's worship. That's the root of worship.
Are we fully present to this moment, or are we living
Right.
out of attachments and wants and needs, resentments of the past and expectations for the future? Or are we really
Right,
truly
right,
here, tending to
right.
this moment fully?
I would give my worth to the living God. It's worship. Isn't it a set of words sung one way or the other, like we've touched on, can go all over the game board.
Talked in
And,
previous episodes of the podcast about how we don't just like sit and meditate or pray to have a moment of stillness and presence, but to be able to cultivate stillness and presence to carry throughout our days.
When
So
you
that
go
we can
out,
make of life
see,
a meditation,
I'm an
life a
active
prayer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm an active contemplative Christian. I'm too old to be an activist,
Ah.
and I'm no longer a zealot. So many would like me to be again. I'm not there.
Right. Yeah.
But I go out to where I'm called to go out and to whom I'm called to go out to. Was students for 10 years at the community college here. It's not that. I'm researching what are my calling, what are those works prepared beforehand by you, Lord God, that I'm to be walking out now at this season in my life, which is a closing season.
So you can give yourself over to that purpose.
Well,
entirely.
otherwise, you have no satisfaction.
Yeah.
You can create
We do find the greatest
pleasure,
satisfaction in service.
XYZ,
But it's fleeting.
but
It's not
the
fulfilling.
authentic self, as Merton would call it, we were talking about
Yes.
the self, the authentic self. He differentiated
Like
between
the capital
ego,
S self in Hinduism or Buddhism, versus the lowercase egoic self. The true self, the one self that we're all a part of. Would you like to read that?
Sure.
You brought something from Merton, actually, speaking of Merton.
Well, from the book your mother gave you.
Yes. Choosing to love the world. It's a good one.
To live a contemplative life, Merton would often say it would help the overall everything a lot if we could really see, in the sense we've been hearing and talking about tonight. Contemplation is life itself, fully awake, fully active, fully aware that it is alive. It is spiritual wonder. It is spontaneous awe at the sacredness of life, being. It is gratitude for life, for awareness, being. It is a vivid realization of the fact that life and being in us proceed from an invisible, transcendent, and infinitely abundant source with a capital S. A definition of fatherhood and why we hear Father God, our Father in heaven, the source. Contemplation is, above all, awareness of the reality of that source. It knows the source, obscurely, inexplicably, but with a certitude that goes beyond reason and beyond simple faith. It is a more profound depth of faith, a knowledge too deep to be grasped in images, in words, or even in clear concepts.
Yeah.
See, we've been talking around
Yes.
that tonight.
Yes.
And
We can't state it explicitly. All we can do is kind of beat around the bush to get a general idea of where we're pointing at.
many spiritual seekers today are encouraging one another, just live the questions, live the mystery. Stop all this frenetic searching or whatever you feel you got to do. Silence is being robbed right now from a lot of the human family. Distractions are becoming like momentary, second by second almost, when we talked about the blue screen life we're living. See?
Yeah.
Contemplation, seeing spiritually in depth, we could say, with understanding and wisdom, hopefully even, is essentially a listening in silence, an expectancy. In other words, the true contemplative is not the one who prepares his mind for a particular message that he or she wants or expects to hear, but who remains empty. Because he knows or she knows that they can never expect or anticipate the word that will transform their darkness into light. Does not even anticipate a special kind of transformation. Does not demand light instead of darkness. That person waits on the word of God in silence. Trust. And when he is, quote, answered, it is not so much by a word that bursts into silence. It is by his silence itself suddenly, inexplicably revealing itself to him as a word of great power, full of the voice of the living God.
Wow. Yeah.
And
Thomas
that
Merton,
is to
folks.
direct us as we've been talking. But you have to take time for that. Like begets like. What are we giving time to? I've got to deal with that all the time. You heard me tell my students, I live with 3 clocks around me if I'm on the computer. I have to. Because I have this polymath mind interested in everything, literally.
Yeah. I know the feeling.
Scientist by background, too. So I have to have solitude. I joke because I discovered with COVID that God gave me a whole park. It's normally empty. A couple of parks, actually. Very nearby. I can walk to them. They're that close.
Nice.
And I have to go and empty out and simply be. Let the bird song take me to God, too.
I like that. Yeah.
I mean,
anything can become that, a signifier of the source of presence. You know, it's, you get to a point in meditation or prayer. I can see them as synonymous when you get down to the depths of either practice. That even the dog barking next door, or the loud car driving by, announcing itself to the world, all of these things become joyful, and they just become other signifiers of the present moment. Any kind of sound, rather than it becoming an annoying interruption, becomes another gong that's reminding you of the present that is always here and available. That perfect stillness, that perfect peaceful
acceptance.
Yes.
Letting it be, because you desire simply to do unto others.
So we're really down to the depth of being at this point, into the deep sense of presence, rather than the small self that can be annoyed by the things going on around it.
And annoyed by each other.
Oh, yeah.
Primarily. I mean, and we're being trained in annoyance rather than acceptance and listening to know truth together.
We are, aren't we?
Then your practice of truth might be different than mine. It might have to be, because your creator knows your design, which is distinct from his design, my design. There's a triune Godhead in Judeo-Christianity. Not a singular, some kind of deep.
Right.
Let us make man according to our image and likeness. Us. Right in the first lines of Judeo-Christian. I have a hard time with the Trinity as it's been brought down sometimes. But when I go back there, El Elohim, plurality, Godhead, doesn't mean there are a lot of gods and goddesses floating around in a triangle.
That's you have God the Father, and through the Holy Spirit, our I guess that would be our connection of soul, the connection of spark through that, and that's our locus through which all the creative potential had, and then the sun brings life in. If I'm not mistaken, some interpretations of the Genesis story, the sun was there at creation.
Yeah,
So was
absolutely.
the Holy Spirit there at creation. And
Of course, yeah, because it's timeless.
Brooding. He was brooding over, I believe, a pre-Adamic, and maybe even more than one
Right.
condition of planet Earth.
Yeah. Sure.
Where do you get the Nephilim from? The giants,
Right.
Goliath
Right.
and his brothers.
Yeah.
Angels having sexual intercourse with the daughters of men.
Well, you can see the pagan roots of some of these stories
sure.
peeking out there
well,
too.
and pagan is just
Yeah.
anything that isn't Abrahamic. So before Abraham, it was
That's
all
right.
pagan, and then
Yeah.
Or heathen. Is
Or yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But yeah, we tend to think of pagan as like like druids and
but
stuff.
we're
but,
neo-paganism,
yeah.
big time.
Oh yeah.
It's sold as products now. I
Yeah.
mean, we had to hunt and know who to ask for a hidden occult book in Madison, Wisconsin. There wasn't a Books A Million with 3 shelves of them,
Yeah.
many written now for children.
Oh yeah.
That
yeah,
hidden esoteric occult knowledge. I mean, you
Yeah.
had to work long and hard.
Yeah.
Susan did to put white magic spells on me.
It's funny because we covered
Kidding.
a gentleman named Martin Shaw recently,
Yeah.
which I think I shared with you as well. And he talks about Christianity as
Right.
this perfect exfoliation of paganism, or paganism brought to its full fruition, which is just profound, so beautiful in the way that it links and celebrates
Right.
these prior traditions that did help inspire much the Christian story making,
Yeah.
style of teaching.
What existed coming.
Yes.
First Advent.
Yes. We see everything as so separate when it's truly actually interlinked and interconnected and forming each other at all times.
I'm going to give both of you guys a little book that I just recently discovered called The Soul of the Indian.
Ah, cool.
And it shows one how badly we missed bringing Christ to our native. The depth of their spirituality.
Right.
Written by one who ended up even a Christian minister. But he understood
Where
the
we've
soul.
gone wrong. So
Yeah,
many
yeah. And
Christians that weren't living up to
Christianity
Christian
has tended
faith.
to do
Truly.
that.
Yeah. Oh, man tends to do that, doesn't he?
Yes. But I'm thinking of the book Tom Howard,
Oh, yeah.
Dominion.
Tom Holland. Yeah, Dominion. Yeah. Great book so far. And so on this note, gentlemen, let's see. We're about an hour and 53 minutes in. Would we like to do one more video or finish out? I had 2 more videos that we didn't get to yet, but we can actually wind it down now and save those for a future
It's your
episode.
preference, I'm guessed.
Let's zoom in the gotten to spot, and my brain's turning a little mushy.
Yeah, right. We did a lot of setup before this episode, guys, to make sure that we had
Right.
this gentleman
No, I
properly
think
lit
it's
and
A good point.
cameras working and sound and audio and all that good stuff.
We'll have
So-
to have you come back, and we'll do it again in a lesser time than what.
Right, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, if you'd like to be a regular guest, we'd always be honored
Well,
to have you.
Yeah.
There's so much that we didn't even get into today, but all that you've shared with me over the years that we've known each other has
No,
impacted me in a positive way, and I'd really like to share those gifts
Right.
with more people. And so check out the last 2 links in the video description, guys, if you're interested, because we cover Ayan Hirsi Ali, former new atheist. Prior to that, she was a Muslim. And so Muslim who became atheist, who then adopted Christianity after becoming quite a famous atheist, friends with people like Richard Dawkins. And so she discusses her debate that she recently had with Richard Dawkins, himself having professed that he's a cultural Christian, but not being able to accept that Ayan truly was a Christian now. By the end of the debate, he admits, like, okay, you are a Christian after all.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that he
It's
likes
an
it or agrees with it.
amazing interview.
It's quite an
Profound
interview.
to watch because we can't imagine her journey.
No, absolutely
You
not.
know, if we've
No.
traveled to Islamic nations,
Where she grew up. Yeah.
you've
Yeah.
had glimpses what that would have been like growing up there.
It's like what Watched was saying, it's like living in the West, we don't even realize, we think it's like, well, the whole world's like us. It's like this. It's like, no, it's not.
No, it's not. Yeah,
And
that's Tom
it's
Holland.
pretty powerful when you have people that come from that place that a lot of us can't fathom how different it is. And I'm not going to say
Right.
better or worse, because not the point of this show, but how different it is. The point where you can't even. And then you see a person, you start looking them up. He's been through a lot. I won't say I'm like know a lot about the Middle East, but like I'm studying.
It's a tough place for a woman, though.
Well, I know
in
it's
some
just a tough,
places.
it's just a tough place in general, and it's tribalism is still a huge issue.
Quite intense, yep.
Intertribal warfare.
Oh, yeah.
So there's
Africa
not,
too.
yeah, and we're not just talking about shooting bows and arrows at each other. No, this is like fully fledged, Kalashnikovs and improvised mortars and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And then also
Wild armies.
well, and just the religious fanaticism when you don't have a secular idea and everything is religious, and then it's just like, well, everything sucks, but if I can get into this group of people or that group of people, it'll be better, or at least I'll have a freaking cause
Or a chance of survival.
and it's no wonder she
And delights in paradise.
Mhm.
and yeah
Mhm.
and
Because we
it's-
get none here.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We live to die.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's right.
we love
yeah.
death like you love life is
Her testimony, I would say, that I heard for the first time, has impacted me as deeply today as any living witness's testimony of a person coming to faith in Christ.
and it's no wonder that she became an atheist first.
Yeah.
Like after dealing with all that and just being like, enough. If God says this is okay and this is the way it should be, why should I participate in that? Like,
All these religions just.
how is this right?
Yeah.
And then,
Or what if you went into the confessional after a college summer of sin and you were honest to your village priest, and his opening line back was, "You're not a member of this period." You walk away. I see that all over. And I'm having to reconcile in minor ways, fortunately, rather than super major ways, with some of the children, because I had my issues as a parent. And I can look back now and see that I could have acted differently, could have spoken differently, could have nurtured differently, could have shaped differently, could have encouraged differently.
What's the willingness to see those things?
Yes.
I think that helps us cultivate that deeper
Yeah.
presence and that communion
Hopefully.
with God that we long for.
Constantine Kissin, the political
Trigonometry.
he was on tour with Jordan Peterson as I don't say this in the bad way, but as the antagonist, to like kind of shred Peterson's ideas. Constantine is very sharp. He mentioned something about that too. It's like after doing this and talking with Jordan about, like Jordan's not trying to convert anybody to Christianity. He's not trying to do this, that, or the other. He's just trying to help people live a really good life, have the best relationship with other people, or help people have the best relationship. And Constantine mentioned about, his family life, kids, and luckily very new in it, having this relation now. And it's it's never too late, but it's heartening. Younger folk getting into this before they end up bitter and resentful.
Yeah, more and more people saying, wait a minute, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It seems that we've been doing that recently, and there's actually some really good stuff here that we maybe want to survive.
Yeah, and whether type of person or not that wants to believe in a God or, angel guy and all that stuff, it's look at the lessons, look at the teaching, be pragmatic about it, if you will, and start applying some of it, what it does, how it helps life.
Look at the way of being.
The proof is in tasting of the pudding.
Yes. Look at the way of being exhibited by that one and try and embody it yourself.
Yeah.
Because that is, like you said, that's where the proof really meets the pudding. So in the last video that we were going to watch tonight, it's elder Christian mystic by the name of John Butler, and he talks about presence, much in line of what we were talking about in this
right.
episode. So I definitely encourage you guys to check that out too. But we'll probably cover it in a future
Do it
episode
another-
here.
Yeah.
So we'll keep those links saved.
See, these
And-
things are eternal
Yes.
that we've been trying to do.
Yes. Yeah.
They were there before us,
They are.
after us.
And pre-existent.
Oh, yeah. That actually, I was having a thought earlier, but the problem I think atheists have with the concept of God and the way we as Christians talk about God is God is not a thing. God is beyond things, before things.
Trans thing.
It's a no thing, not nothing,
But it's
no
no
thing.
thing.
Gotcha.
And if you're an
Yeah.
atheist, everything has to be a
I
thing.
think.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh well, you know, maybe we're in a simulation that this big computer, oh that thing.
Okay. What
But
started the
how do
simulation?
you wrap your head around
Yeah.
something that isn't a thing, but is
That
also
pre-exists
all
things.
things?
That is the
Right.
source of all things.
and that will be.
Yeah.
Right.
That no one
Period.
word can encompass, yet it is the source of every word. You know?
I am. I
That
am.
I am.
That I will.
I will be.
Is a way you're beginning to hear the I am
Ah,
statement from
that runs
Scripture.
through existence.
What will living God be this time and if time?
Well, I think that's up to our co-creation. That's up to all of us together to figure out internally and to
Right.
live it out. What would we like it to be? God's given us this free will through which we can enact this highest way. We can perfect the art of loving here together.
We can actuate His love in and through us. Is a word for Thy kingdom come. Actually,
Right.
here on earth.
Well, on that note, actualizers,
Amen.
let us actuate that love in this world. It's been awesome speaking to you today, Gary. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a good appointed time.
Absolutely. It's always a gift to share.
And I'm grateful
joy
to
of
both
presence.
of you. And you know that I have to you just when I was battling Lyme disease for 2.5 years.
Mm.
God had you in the classroom to help me. Thanks.
I'm grateful that I was able to be
We're
of
bonded.
service. Amen, brother. Love
Yep,
you.
We're brothers.
Love you guys too. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
This has been Gary Bergel as well.
The Berg.
The Berg.
The
I like
Berg,
that. Your wife calls you the
B-E-R-G,
Berg.
the She's Bird.
So does
She
that
raises canaries.
wait? Does that mean there's more under the surface than there is on top of it? If you're the Berg,
Berg.
like an
an
iceberg.
Yeah.
Or a mountain.
I think that's true.
As in-
There is a
Right.
lot more going on underneath the surface. And I intuited that when I first started taking your class. I was like, whoa, this guy's deep. This guy's got a lot going on. I really like the way he's teaching about art here. I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good note to,
All right. Well, goodbye,
to
everybody.
finish out on. Yeah,
Yeah.
we love you guys. We'll talk to you soon. See you next time.
Meow.